We're here at EBADay TV, and we're talking with Simon Newstead of RBS, and of course we're going to be talking about Sepa migration still. I mean, so last December it was big news that there was this draft EU regulation that we now have end dates, supposedly. Everyone says this is a critical step towards Sepa migration. Do you agree with this view? And I mean, how close are we?
It's absolutely critical, Liz. I think in many ways the issuance of the regulation in December was a recognition of an inevitability. I think there's only so far that Sepa could go as an entirely self-regulatory initiative when fundamentally it's realising a political vision and it's a key component of realising the single market. So if you look at the adoption statistics that we all quote from on a regular basis and how relatively low they are after 3+ years for credit transfers and nearly a year and a half for direct debits, I think that's a very clear signal that this regulation was needed to get us to the efficiency and competition benefits of the Sepa vision.
I mean, yeah, Sepa's often talked about as a political vision. I mean, is this draft, how close is this draft regulation to the original Sepa vision?
I think if you take the Commission's original draft, it was a big step in the right direction because it recognised for the first time we needed to set firm end dates for a migration process. If you go back to the Sepa vision, which is about a harmonised and efficient outcome, there were a few concerns, I think, with the detail of the draft proposal, which is perhaps inevitable at this stage of the legislative process.
Can you go into a bit more detail about what some of your biggest concerns are?
I'd say probably the biggest three concerns would be scope and the level of detail of some of the technical requirements and what that might mean for innovation. And thirdly, probably the whole area of is the drafting sufficiently precise to realise a really harmonised outcome as opposed to unintendedly allowing a suboptimal, slightly fragmented position. So if I can illustrate those 3 points, as drafted, the scope of the regulation went beyond retail payments, retail euro payments, credit transfers and direct debits, and included high-value payments. Now, high-value payments in the shape of Target 2 payments and Euro 1 transactions have never been in the scope of Sepa, and including them in the scope of the regulation and requiring the adoption of the ISO standards would have been a major additional change against really an unnecessarily fast timescale. Moving those systems to the similar standards makes sense in the long term, particularly when the rest of the world is ready to move its high-value payment systems to those standards. But in one leap, and making it part of the Sepa migration was too much. And the good news is that that's been recognised by the European Parliament and the European Council, and I think now by the Commission as well, and there's an acceptance that that can come back out of the scope. So that's a good example of the scope issue. To look at the second issue of the level of technical detail, that there was a challenge in drafting the regulation to get sufficient detail to mean that schemes move to the right set of harmonised technical standards. Getting into too much detail and putting too much regulatory governance around future changes runs risks to innovation, runs risks to the speed of innovation and the market's ability to evolve and innovate in an effective and agile way. And again, I think a lot of work's been done by the Parliament and the Council, and both of whom have moved very rapidly and are clearly taking this regulation very seriously. That the rapporteur in the Parliament, Sari Essayah, has done an excellent job in the way she's grappled with some of these issues and has made some very positive suggestions, and likewise the Hungarian presidency with the Council Working Group. My third issue I alluded to was the one around will this produce a harmonised outcome as opposed to a fragmented one?
That's one of the biggest concerns.
That's definitely one of the biggest concerns, and there were some risks in the original text that could have meant we didn't quite get to that outcome, and we could have got to one that, yes, there was adoption of the Sepa schemes, but not really the move to a single set of standards and a harmonised environment, which is necessary to drive the real efficiency and competition benefits. And again, the keys in the regulation are some of the key definitions. This is when it gets all a little technical. So some of the key definitions and terms, payment system, payment scheme, combined with two of the key concepts in the regulation, which are described as interoperability and reachability. It's really those set of requirements, getting those drafted just right is the way to avoid the fragmentation risk. I think, are we quite there yet in the drafting? Possibly not. I mean, this continues to be work in progress, but that's why RBS and other banks and key industry bodies like the European Banking Federation, through its Payments Regulatory Expert Group, the EPC, and obviously discussions also within the EBA community, the discussions that we've been having with the key regulators involved, so the Parliament, the Commission, the Council, and indeed the ECB, I think are moving us to a recognition of how we can solve some of these difficult issues. So are we there? Is the text perfect yet from our perspective? Not yet. There are still one or two issues left, but we're moving significantly in the right direction.
I mean, obviously the draft regulation is big news. We can talk about it for a long, long time. But but what else besides the draft regulation is needed to finally get to Sepa success?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because we've tended to focus as an industry on the regulation as being the answer. It's an absolutely critical component, because without the focus that the end date will provide, the investments that need to happen collectively won't happen in the speed they otherwise would need to. But beyond the regulation, there's I think two or three things that needs to happen next. One of the most important is communication. So this is a real focused communication campaign and an education campaign. And I'd say the responsibility for that is with the banks as providers. It's also with the public authorities to make sure that all users fully understand the benefits of Sepa and fully understand the limited adjustments that they will need to make to move on to the new Sepa instrument. So communication and leadership, I think, is key. So leadership, again, from the banks with their own clients, the banks and other PSPs through the sort of interbank organisations such as the EPC, but also leadership through the Sepa Council, which the Commission established with the ECB as really a very sort of figurehead and leadership senior body. And I think they come into their own once the regulation's agreed, as a way of bringing users, regulators and the supply side together to figure out what are the right messages, what are the right communication approaches to make this transition as smooth and as sort of pain-free as it possibly can be. And I suppose the other part of it is, I think when we have an end date, there's a little bit more work we've got to do as an industry and in close collaboration with our users to look at some of the existing legacy payment schemes in certain countries and say, are there things that still need to be bolted on to the Sepa schemes, the credit transfer and or the direct debit scheme? Are there certain things that the corporate community would still benefit from being included? Are there things that would help tax payments being made more efficiently, pension payments being made more efficiently? And how can those be built in to subsequent versions of the schemes never being intended to be static? They are meant to evolve. Are there things that will help the migration process, but critically to do these things in a harmonised single European way, rather than each country developing what are called AOSs, additional optional services or local characteristics, which may seem like a good idea in the sense that they're satisfying a local demand, but actually are anti kind of efficiency and risk fragmentation. Whereas doing these things collectively and hammering out a European solution is the right thing to do.
Excellent. Always a pleasure, Simon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz.